Hi, everyone. Welcome to this ILGA World webinar on anti-LGBTI plus bullying and the right to education. I'm Curro Peña, he in pronouns. I'm part of ILGA World's research team, and I'll be your host today. First of all, thank you so much for the huge interest. I will say that the number of registrations have completely exceeded our expectations, and I think that speaks to the fact that bullying is a big concern shared by many different actors. And today we'll have the opportunity to hear from some of them, and hopefully we all will leave this webinar with new ideas, new inspirations on how to address such a pervasive and complicated issue. As a person who endured bullying in certain parts of their childhood and adolescence, it really inspired me already to see so many interesting people accepting our invitation to talk today. So I will quickly remember the agenda for today. First, we'll have a presentation by the independent expert of the United Nations on sexual orientation and gender identity. Then I will briefly introduce you to the new section of the ILGA World database, which is dedicated to laws against bullying. We'll also have a roundtable with representatives from different areas involved in education and a Q&A section. And last but not least, the special rapporteur on the right to education will give us some words for closure. But first, let's do some very quick housekeeping. This event will be in English, but there is voice interpretation in Spanish and French. So for this reason, we kindly request panelists, and I request myself to speak slowly to facilitate the work of the interpretation. If you want to listen this in French or Spanish, you can click on a little globe that is at the bottom of the Zoom app and choose your language. There is also live captioning in English if you click on the CC button. And of course, ILGA is committed to creating a space where everyone can participate fully and feel respected. So please, either on the chat or in any moment, use inclusive and respectful language, because we have a zero tolerance approach to any abusive or disruptive behavior. And we have colleagues working on making sure that the chat remains a safe space. This session is not being live streamed, but please remember this is being recorded and maybe shared later. So please keep this in mind when you share information about yourself or your work. With that said, let me introduce you to your first speaker, which is Graeme Reid. He's a South African scholar who has worked extensively as a researcher and a lecturer on LGBTI issues. He was the director of the LGBT rights program at Human Rights Watch, and since 2023, he's been the independent expert of the United Nations on protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And in this capacity, he has very kindly accepted our invitation. So thank you so much, Graeme. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation to participate today. I'm going to present some of the key findings of the report that I presented to the 80th session of the UN General Assembly in November last year. The right to education is a right formally recognized by all UN member states, although, of course, what that means in practice differs widely. Education is generally understood as essential not only for individual development, but also for social participation, economic opportunity, and democratic life. However, for many lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and gender diverse learners, access to education goes beyond the ability to enroll in school. It's about whether they can learn in safety, whether they are treated with dignity, and whether they feel that they belong. The report examines how discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity affects the enjoyment of the right to education. And the findings show that in many parts of the world, LGBT learners face distinct and persistent barriers. The right to education is universally recognized in international human rights law, including in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and binding treaties such as the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and CEDAW. States are required to make primary education free and compulsory, ensure access to secondary and higher education, and promote the full development and dignity of every child. These obligations must be progressively realized and implemented without discrimination. International law explicitly prohibits discrimination in education, including on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, and requires both equal access and equitable outcomes. States must also protect students from bullying, violence, and exclusion in school settings. Comprehensive sexuality education, when evidence-based and non-discriminatory, is recognized as part of the right to education and supports related rights such as health and access to information. States are further required to ensure inclusive school environments, respect students' identities, and monitor education systems to identify and address discrimination in practice. Bullying and violence are global challenges in educational settings, but research consistently shows that LGBT learners are disproportionately affected. They are more likely to experience physical violence, sexual harassment, verbal abuse, cyberbullying, and social exclusion. Transgender and gender diverse students often report the highest levels of harassment. The consequences extend beyond individual incidents. Students who feel unsafe are more likely to miss school, disengage from learning, or leave education entirely. Over time, this can affect academic achievement, mental health, and future opportunities. While some countries have anti-discrimination laws or anti-bullying policies that explicitly include sexual orientation and gender identity, implementation varies significantly. In other contexts, legal protections do not exist or are incomplete. It is in this context, where gaps in adequate legal protections persist, that the new section of the ILGA World database tracking legislation that protects LGBT youth from bullying in education is both necessary and timely. An important element of the right to education is access to effective remedies when rights are violated. In many education systems, complaint mechanisms are unclear, inaccessible, or not trusted by students. Some learners fear retaliation or exposure. Others report that complaints are not handled appropriately. Where students do not feel confident that harm will be addressed fairly and confidentially, incidents may go unreported. This can create environments where discrimination persists without accountability. School policies also shape daily experience. In some contexts, strict gender-based dress codes, rules governing appearance, or limitations on access to facilities create challenges for transgender and gender diverse learners. Being denied the use of one's chosen name or pronouns, or being excluded from activities can have a profound effect on a young person's sense of identity and belonging. These exclusionary practices are often framed as administrative or cultural norms. However, their impact on participation and well-being can be significant. Education does not occur in isolation from health and well-being. Access to school-based counseling and mental health services is uneven across countries. Where services do exist, they may not always be equipped to respond sensitively to the needs of LGBT students. Fear and stigma can deter students from seeking support. In many studies globally, LGBT youth report elevated levels of anxiety, depression, and self-harm compared to their peers. While these outcomes have multiple causes, hostile school environments are frequently identified as a significant contributing factor. Another dimension concerns what is taught in schools. Age-appropriate, evidence-based sexuality education that addresses gender equality and sexual diversity has been shown in many contexts to contribute to safer and more respectful school climates. However, curricula differ widely between countries. In some systems, sexual orientation and gender identity are omitted. In others, they are presented in stigmatizing or inadequate ways. In certain contexts, such content is restricted by law. The content of education shapes not only knowledge, but also attitudes and social norms. It's important to note that there are examples of constructive practice. Some education systems have integrated anti-bullying frameworks that explicitly include sexual orientation and gender identity, introduced teacher training programs to promote inclusive learning environments, established gender-sensitive counseling services, and mandated inclusive curriculum content. Evidence suggests that supportive school environments correlate with improved attendance, academic performance, and mental health outcomes for LGBT learners. The right to education is not limited to access to an educational institution or enrollment in a classroom. International human rights law makes clear that education must be available, accessible, acceptable, and adaptable. For learners of diverse sexual orientations and gender identities, this means education that is safe, non-discriminatory, and respectful of their dignity. The experiences described in the report are, of course, not uniform across countries. They vary significantly depending on legal frameworks, political context, and social attitudes. However, the patterns that emerge from research and testimony are sufficiently consistent to warrant sustained attention. Ultimately, the quality of an education system can often be measured by how well it protects those who are most vulnerable to exclusion. Education shapes not only individual futures, but ultimately the nature of society. This requires developing an education system that ensures all learners can participate fully and safely, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Crane, both for the very interesting insights on our report. I used that report a lot in our work for this section, the ILGA World database. And also thank you for the shouting out of our database, as that will give me a very good segue to the next presentation, which is precisely about the work we've done on laws against bullying for the ILGA World database. So can you confirm? Can you all see my screen, right? I'm sharing screen. Okay. So as Graham mentioned, we in the ILGA World database has recently released a new section, with all the data that we have gathered in our research on laws protecting against bullying based on sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics. For those of you who might not be familiar with it, the ILGA World database is publicly available, easily to access, and free, of course, to access resource where you can find data on laws, human rights bodies, advocacy opportunities, and news related to different SOGIESC issues worldwide. You can find it both in English and Spanish on database.ilga.org. And I really recommend you to, either after this meeting, during the weekend, or when you find the time to do it, go to this link and explore it, because there is so much information there that it's impossible to include it all in a short presentation, but I will try to give you a quick introduction. So in the database, we classify information in 5 areas. And the first one is dedicated to legal frameworks, so legislation, regulations, case law. Area 2, it will let you learn about the state of ratification of the main international human rights treaties. In Area 3, we have the SOGIESC related work of the UN treaty bodies. Area 4 is dedicated to the work of the UN special procedures on SOGIESC issues. And finally, Area 5 has recommendations related to SOGIESC issues in the framework of the Universal Periodic Review. I will focus just on the first one, because that's where we work on this topic. In the Area 1, we have right now, we cover 17 different categories, ranging from criminalization to legal gender recognition, conversion practices, laws on same-sex unions, etc. A lot of different topics. But since last year, we have had the chance to add a new one, which is the category on laws protecting against school bullying. This is a section, by the way, that has been made possible also with the help of the law firm Cooley, who helped us a lot with the initial research. So shout out to that and thank you. You will have someone from that organization participating in the roundtable later. But as I was saying, this new section, we cover laws against school bullying. What we mean by this is laws or legislation that explicitly bans school bullying or harassment in the area of education based on the grounds of SOGIESC, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics. As you know, and bullying is it's a problem that is very complex, it's very issue, and that requires to be addressed using many different tools and with the involvement of many different actors. One of those tools, and it was mentioned in Graham's presentation, is legislation, protective legislation. It's true, and this is a comment that we receive a lot, that of course laws are not enough in themselves to solve anything, but they're quite important. They, of course, offer a framework for policies. If you have protocols, if you have codes of conduct, if you have a mechanism to resolve conflicts in schools that are backed by strong legislation, those policies become stronger too. Graham has detailed a lot of the importance of this, but to mention a few, they allow for more accountability. For instance, imagine a school board whose protocols against bullying do not mention the SOGIESC ground, while the legislation applicable says that they have to be incorporated in anti-bullying policies. So this will allow other actors, such as families, students, schools, or educational authorities to address that inaction, to ask for the inclusion of this person. And it's also important to pay attention to legislation and not only to policies, because even if no legal framework is immutable, no legal framework can remain the same forever, they are a little bit different, more difficult to change. They need bigger majorities. They need normally a process of public discussion. And this in some way helps to maintain them and to serve as a tool to develop better mechanisms and a better response to bullying. However, we know again that this is not the full story, and I will go into a little bit deeper into that now. This map that you see here is the map that you will see when you open the database. This represents which jurisdictions on the world has adopted these laws at the national level that explicitly ban bullying based on SOGIESC. The more grounds, at least one of those grounds, the more grounds that are covered, the darker that is represented in this map. For instance, if only sexual orientation is covered, it will be a lighter hue, and if all of the 4 SOGIESC grounds, it will be darker. But again, this doesn't tell the whole story. This is a legal database, so we shouldn't understand that if a country has no legislation incorporated in this map, it means that there is nothing there. No, there might be policies. We have a lot of feedback from countries that are not represented here as having the darkest color, but that they have a lot of long-standing policies that are actually effective and that are examples of good practices. And also, it's important to take into account that we're only talking about national level legislation. So there are countries like Canada, for instance, where even if they appear without color in the map, that doesn't mean that there is no legislation at all. This is something that we're trying to see how to better represent in the map. But there are countries where the protection is only, legal protection is only enforced in some regions of the country, some states of the country, some provinces. In those cases, we classify these countries as various, which means that they vary across, the protection varies across the territory. And I think it's important to highlight it, because I understand that when you first see this map, you can think, oh, in my country, I thought that we had these protections, or I'm an activist in these countries and I've been working on this. So I think it's important to highlight. In any case, since the map cannot have all of the information, we also include a lot of explanations in a very big chart in the same page, where you can find both more information on the laws that we have represented in the map, but also on documents and tools that are not represented in the map. For instance, policies in some cases, although this is not a comprehensive policy data, if there are some information, you can see in this snapshot that we have some information on a framework that was adopted in Seychelles, but also legislation in Slovakia and Serbia. And also we cover bills that are being discussed. We think it's important to also give information on that, even if it's not represented on the map. And something that our database has is that you can access to the direct source just by clicking on the name of the legal instrument. So I think it's interesting to be able to check it for yourselves. And finish some data that our research found and the way when we were looking for this legislation. As of now, we have found that there are 38 UN member states where there are legislation at the national level that explicitly protect against bullying or harassment in education based on sexual orientation, 30 on the basis of gender identity, 13 gender expression, and 14 in the basis of sex characteristics. So that's the main number and the main result that we have. But also on the database, you can find several graphs representing this information. They are interactive. So I, again, encourage you to go to the database and see them for yourself. I wanted to highlight this one because this is a timeline on when states have adopted this legislation that has met our thresholds. And I think it also highlights what I said in my welcoming you into the webinar, which is that there is interest in this, and in particular, legislators seems to be becoming more interested in this, and over the last 15 to 20 years. I think it's interesting to see that too. And some numbers that are not as easily seen in the database, but I think are interesting. There are 10 UN member states where even if there are no legal protections covering the whole territory of the state, there is protection at some level, legal protection. I have highlighted here the cases of Argentina and Australia. I mentioned Canada before, but we could also say the US or Austria, Italy, and yeah, again, this is all in the database. Then on the other side of the spectrum, there are 6 UN member states that have approved legislation that covers also GS grounds. These 6 countries are Spain, Finland, Portugal, the Netherlands, Andorra, and Greece. And I think it's also interesting that we as researchers acknowledge some limitations. And in this case, there were 2 states that we weren't really clear on whether we could conclude that there was legal protection or not, either because there are laws that contradict each other and they are still in force formally, or because there is case law that, again, makes it unclear to know whether the legislation that we consider will formally give this protection is still in force or no, which is the cases of Hungary and Bulgaria. But again, something that I think is important to highlight for all these databases, again, this is law, and we know that from the law to the practice, there is a lot of work to be done before. But this is something that will be discussed in the next roundtable, probably, because we will be talking about practices. But in any case, I think it's interesting, and I really encourage you to see it. So thank you so much. You have my email there in case you have any questions. I know this was a very brief explanation, but I'm looking forward to the rest of the webinar and to you to learn more about this. So if you want anything, please do not hesitate to contact me. And with that said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I think we can move on to the next part of the webinar, which is I will need some water. Okay, so as I was saying, let me introduce you to Andrea Baldwin. She holds a law degree from the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú and a master's in human rights, conflict, and justice from the School of African and Oriental Studies from SOAS, the University of London. She's been a fellow in the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and now she's part of the advocacy team of ILGA World. She will be the facilitator of the roundtable, and I'll leave the floor to you, Andrea. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kuro, for the introduction. We're now gonna move on to the presentations by several panelists. We're gonna start with Enrique Gallego Capdevila. I'm gonna introduce each panelist and then ask a couple of questions, and then move on to the next panelist, and then we'll finalize with a Q&A session. So everyone, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box in the chat. Enrique Gallego Capdevila is a special counsel at Cooley, focusing on EU digital regulation, data protection, and cybersecurity. He advises global technology companies, online platforms, and interactive services, including dating apps and other high-engagement digital environments, on platform governance, user safety, age assurance, and compliance with the Digital Services Act, AI Act, GDPR, and related EU frameworks. His work frequently involves advisory and litigation before EU courts and regulators. Enrique has significant experience advising on the implementation of AI technologies, including governance frameworks for the ethical and compliant deployment of AI systems, AI-enabled personalization, content moderation tools, and automated decision-making. In parallel with his practice, Enrique is actively engaged in pro bono work supporting community and civil society initiatives, applying his expertise in digital rights, privacy, and platform accountability to advance access to justice and responsible innovation. My first question to Enrique is, based on your experience with online platform policies, what are examples of good practices to protect children from cyberbullying, particularly LGBTIQ plus youth? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your introduction and also for the question. Before we begin, I just wanted to thank ILGA for giving us the opportunity to collaborate on this project because, as Kura mentioned at the beginning, our law firm has been deeply involved in the research project. And I'm here just today by myself, but I have more than 40 colleagues across different jurisdictions that have contributed to this project. And I'm very happy to be here today with all of you and also speaking on their behalf. So, as a lawyer who works on a daily basis on the intersection of technology, regulations, online platforms, we are also confronted on a daily basis to questions regarding self-expression in the digital sphere. And also, I advise platforms on how to protect the younger users of their online communities, aka dating apps, or for instance, any kind of social media platform. So when it comes to what are the best practices for protecting the youngest communities online, we have already spotted several good practices that some platforms have designed by themselves, and those best practices, they have been codified or they have been transposed into law. So just to give you an example why this is critical, just take a step back and think. A 14-year-old who is questioning their identity nowadays, where do they go? The answer to this question is typically they are not going to seek for answers at the school, and probably they are not going to discuss with their parents or with their friends. They're going to try to find some answers to these questions online. And platforms, they have the obligation and the responsibility to allow young users to interact with others, to seek for this information, but also to be able to navigate this period of their life or to interact with other users in a safe space. So what can platforms do in order to protect children online from any kind of abuse, bullying, etc.? First of all, it's all about clarity and transparency. Platforms, they are obliged to adopt explicit rules about harassment based on sexual orientation and on gender identity. If you're users of platforms like Instagram or Meta, you may have seen these notices already. They have been implemented for some years already. And we see that the majority of the platforms, not only they have paper policies, but actually they have already implemented some technical solutions in order to effectively protect children. Since I became a user of social media platforms when I was a teenager, it was long time ago. As a user, I can see that platforms have adopted several design choices in order to protect the younger users of our communities. For instance, you will see nowadays that the default setting for only online platforms in the majority of social media platforms, the default position is having the account private, and also that there are like restrictions in place by default that prevent users from receiving messages from unknown adults or from people who are outside of their circle of contacts. You may have noticed that nowadays it's easier to block users online than before, and also that it's easier to report harmful content online. However, when it comes to the reporting or the report of harmful content, we are experiencing as user or as someone who is monitoring how content moderation tools are being implemented, we are experiencing some, I don't know how to play this. We're seeing that the implementation is not going as well as it should. Why? Because content moderation, of course, is typically enforced by AI tools that do not really understand the nuances of the language that the people from our communities use on a daily basis. And I would like to provide a couple of examples. There is a difference between speech targeting our communities and also when a young person is talking about their transition or their mental health or they are doing a coming out. We as adults, as human beings, we're able to make this distinction. But often when platforms, they are relying on automated tools for content moderation, they are unable to make this difference. What are we seeing? That sometimes platforms are overcorrecting identity-related content, and this content is being removed, and it's silencing people from our communities. And on the other hand, we are also seeing that sometimes these platforms, they are under enforcing their own rules, and that harassment or hate speech is being spread quickly because these tools, they have been proven not to be effective enough. In order to correct these deviations, we see that the major platforms, they are committed with organizations from our communities, and they are trying to implement some nuances in their content moderation tools. Just to give you an example, how things should work in practice in an ideal future is that these AI moderation tools should be context aware, in the sense that they should be able to learn a little bit more about our communities, the certain words that we use in an affirming or in an ironic way. And of course, these same words outside this context, they may be considered to be abusive, but the systems, they need to be able to understand that difference. So yeah, also we know that the platforms, they are onboarding tons of human resources for reviewing content, and they are now giving specific trainings for their moderators on LGBTIQ plus issues. And also they have the legal obligation nowadays to be more transparent about the error rates when it comes to content moderation. So yeah, this is just a hint of how how platforms are trying to protect the youngest members of our communities online.
Thank you, Enrique, for sharing those good practices, especially the ones that have been turned into policy and laws, and also for highlighting the main challenges that the implementation is facing. My next question for you is, Today, many jurisdictions are adopting new regulatory frameworks to protect children online. For instance, age-based restrictions in social media use them. Do you see any risks in these policies limiting LGBTIQ+ children's access to supportive online resources? How could they be addressed?
Okay, this is a very, very complex question. And of course, if you are monitoring what's going in well, not only in Europe, but also in Australia or in the US, it's true that there are new legislative initiatives in the pipeline that are currently being discussed. Also, yeah, in Australia, in the United Kingdom, regarding age assurance and age restrictions. And this is a very sensitive topic for us. Not only because we are seeing around the world that there's the need for a stricter age verification, but also because we are seeing that social media platforms, some of them, they are considering applying social media bans for users below 16 or implementing parent consent. Of course, we understand that the ultimate goal or the intention of these bans or of this new stricter age verification mechanism is to protect children. But also, I mean, one question for all the audience and for all the participants is the following: if we make access harder to for younger users to these social media platforms, who would be losing first? The answer to this question is the young persons who do not feel safe offline and probably online would be the ones who would be losing first. For some members of our community, being online is not a luxury. It's a way for receiving mental support, peer validation. It's also a source of information that cannot be accessible elsewhere in schools or in our families. So, what would be the risk of cutting off these safe spaces? Well, you can imagine that some children, they may lose this sense of belonging. They will be deprived from the opportunity of interacting with other online users that are in the same situation as them. So it could be argued that all these measures that intend to protect the children, actually, they are kind of erasing a part of the youngest members of our community online. So what are organizations doing nowadays? Not only NGOs, but also some law firms and people who are active in this space. Nowadays, they are advocating for appropriate age assurance mechanism, which means that we are debating whether requesting to provide an ID in order to open a social media account is the best idea to protect users. Think about all those underage users that they still do not have an ID card, or also migrants. They may not have a recognized ID document or passport, and if they don't have it, they will be prevented from accessing to social media platforms. It's still to be done. I don't think that there are a lot of child risk impact assessments that have been performed out there to assess what the impact would be of implementing these restrictive measures. And actually, it's also a question for all of us: is this the right way to protect children online, considering that we are preventing them from a certain harm, but also we are isolating them from the support that they need. I'm very much conscious that the balance is not easy. That's why we're trying to learn a little bit more about this subject on a daily basis, because of course we want to avoid having regulations that become purely restrictive, because we understand that this is coming from good intentions, but it may have negative impact in the younger users of our communities.
Thank you so much, Enrique. As you said before, it is important that these tools are context aware, and therefore these types of restrictions should not repeat offline forms of violence in online spaces. And I think this has also been considered in the ISOGIESC report on, for example, different forms of violence and harassment and the enforcement of binary rules in online spaces. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation. Now we're going to turn to our next speaker, Michelle Mosupi. Michelle Mosupi is an education leader and social justice advocate with over 13 years of experience in teacher training, curriculum management, and professional development. As the head of the National Professional Development Institute for the National Professional Teachers Organization of South Africa, she provides strategic oversight for teacher development initiatives across all 9 provinces of South Africa. Michelle is an educational leader who actively participates in national curriculum committees to enhance professional development for educators. Furthermore, she serves as a Southern African Young Educators Network convener for Education International Africa, advocating for youth. She also represents national youth and LGBTIQ+ issues through the Federation of Unions of South Africa. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you.
My first question for you is, what are the main challenges that teachers and other education professionals face to address bullying in their schools?
Thank you for the question. So, as a country, we have stubborn patriarchy, and we are plagued by violence. Most recently, our president declared gender-based violence as a national disaster. So clearly, already government acknowledges that there's a crisis. So this has a ripple effect on communities and in schools. But moreover, it affects more the marginalized groups in the schooling in the schooling communities. So the marginalized groups in terms of the LGBTQI plus in schools, what the South African Council for Education, which regulates teachers in the country, what they have constantly reported that the current cases that exists. 3 of the most cases, 1 is of corporal punishment, 2 of sexual misconduct, and 3 on professional relations. And we hardly speak in terms of professional. I want to hone in into professional relations because it speaks particularly to the teacher, who much of the time experiences the violence within schools, the discrimination, particularly those who are transgender and those who are gender diverse, and also the learners who experience the discrimination due to them being gender diverse, who don't conform to gender norms. And much of South Africa's areas, we have a lot of rural areas in the country. So you would then imagine that much of these spaces, we have more rural, we have more leaders that are more conservative, leaders that are more cultured, and they then that's where you see a lot of the discrimination. But more than that, the teacher bullying that happens also, it's due to the ageism. What we're seeing, the trend that is happening from a union perspective, what we're seeing in schools, much of the older teachers in the system would not really come out because of the fear of the cultured leaders, of the conservativeness within spaces. So they would really remain within their closet. But the teacher currently that's coming into the system, the young teachers that are coming into the teaching profession are more liberated. They are more out. They're coming out, but they face a lot of discrimination in the space, because the school management team, the principals, are not fully capacitated. We have what we call in the country a school-based SBST, which is a school-based team that is intended to support learners and to support teachers. But that platform is supported a lot by government in terms of capacitating the SBSTs to deal with supporting students who are going through child abuse, who are going through bullying, who are going through any forms of violence within the schooling system. But you then realize that the school management team who are supposed to be part of these processes don't attend these sessions. They send other members that are part of these sessions they send them into these training sessions that are then arranged by government. So you then have a principal who's having inadequate training, who is lacking capacity to deal with issues that speaks to the LGBTQI plus persons. So if in just giving two examples, for example, we've had a case where a teacher, because they transgender, they are born male but are identifying themselves as female. However, they have not really changed their identification on their ID number, on their ID. So what then happens is they apply for a position, and when they apply for a position to go to a promotional post, and when they get into the interviews, they are then expecting a male person. Then a female enters the process, and they then get unfairly discriminated. But as a organization on processes like that, we then intervene and put in a grievance to ensure that members of the LGBTQI are given fair opportunities. So we do not tolerate instances like that where our members are unfairly treated. Another example is where the teachers, a similar, and I liked what Graham was saying in his opening, what he echoed. I want to echo what he said in saying that the gender diverse and the transgender persons face the harshest discrimination in the schooling space. We speak a lot about the learner, but the teacher too, who has to bring about this quality education, is also affected. Their mental health is affected. They get anxious. Some of them are seeing psychiatrists. And that space is really a space that has not really been explored quite enough, because we constantly looking at the learner. But we also have young teachers who are coming in, and not to discriminate against the older teachers who are also in the system, because they too play in the holistic system. They too play a role in the quality education. And as I said just earlier on, when the South African Council of Education was also saying that some of they have over 2,600 cases just on professional relations on bullying, and a lot of these cases stem from LGBTQI persons who are being discriminated against. So yeah, I think that's what I wanted to touch on in terms of some of the discrimination that teachers are facing in schools. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Michelle. It really is not possible to oversee the fact that gender-based violence is a structural and institutional issue, but that has a disproportionate impact on marginalized communities. And thank you so much for shining a light on the forms of violence teachers face, especially teachers that do not conform to gender norms or gender non-conforming teachers, and how this creates a broader climate of silence and repression. And it is important to also discuss on how the lack of visible role models has an impact on LGBTI students, and also discourages the existence of a safe learning space. My second question for you is, what role can unions play in addressing anti-LGBTIQ plus and gender-based bullying? Can you share with us some examples of good practices your organization has worked on?
Yeah, obviously we are member organizations to the Education International, and they have resolutions that speaks to anti-bullying, particularly to the LGBTI persons, and it was re-emphasized or reinforced now in the last Congress. The EI Congress, and also as a member organization to the Federation of Unions of South Africa, we also have resolutions that speaks to non-violence in the workplace. But what I want to first speak to as one of the positives that have come out that have come out now from some of the consultative discussions that we've had with government. The National Education Policy Act in South Africa forces government to consult teacher unions when they have policies or when they formulate policies or implement policies. So we then play a critical role in influencing and enhancing some of the mechanisms that can be put in place to ensure that our teachers as well as our learners are not discriminated against. But most recently, what has happened is we have a subject called life orientation, which is a compulsory subject for learners. And that compulsory subject has incorporated content. They've amended the curriculum, which we played a critical role in. They have amended the curriculum to include comprehensive sexual education in the curriculum. So from grades 4 to grade 12, life skills and life orientation has content that speaks to the comprehensive sexual education, and we had an important role to play there because the government consulted a lot. There is currently also a SOGI guideline that we've also been playing a critical role in consultative process where they are trying to ensure that there's a reduction of the bullying in schools due to gender identity issues, gender diverse learners, teachers on gender, on transgender persons. So the only problem that we have in that, yes, we are in the right direction in terms of advocating for this. However, the subject life orientation and life skills in the country, because it's a compulsory subject, what they do is they allocate a subject that you are qualified for. For example, I'm a teacher. They will allocate, I'm a qualified accounting teacher. They will allocate accounting to me. And life orientation would be sort of an add-on after they've allocated what's this my main core subject that I'm specialized in. So the fear we have as teacher unions is that if you are then allocating life orientation to a person who's not really passionate about it, who really still has their personal bias, then they therefore don't bring the message correctly or teach the message correctly as per the content that we are trying to bring about within the system. But there's a lot of engagements that we can do as teacher unions. Currently, in the last 3 years, we have been training over 22,500 in collaboration with government on DBE priorities, on the department's priorities. If they have a specific issue as their priority. For example, in the previous years, they had coding and robotics as a priority. So if they have it as a priority, they then collaborate with teacher unions to then ensure that we capacitate our membership because we have the members. And now what the role we can play as unions is to issues like LGBTQI, we can mediate the guidelines on anti-bullying because we have guidelines on anti-bullying. We have protocols on discrimination. We have the SOGI guidelines that we are busy consulting on, that we're waiting for the councils of education ministers approval on. We can also ensure that we do the advocacy. We also play a critical role in the culture in schools. So that that places us in the forefront in ensuring that we change perspectives, we change the way people perceive things. And additionally, we are doing such an important, we have from an NEPTOSA's perspective, we have a youth desk where we try to capacitate these young people and young persons. So we trying to ensure that they have a space where they feel safe. We create an environment that is safe for them and not where they feel the anxiety, where they feel anxious. So we try to constantly have different capacity sessions, training sessions on sensitivity where we sensitize. Because some people also, the issue is not that they don't want to do better, they don't know better. So we then also can play a critical role in doing that. But just to say now, currently we are busy in an school-related gender-based violence project that we started 2 years ago with the Steve Synod Foundation, a UK-based foundation, where we are honing in on boys aged 13 to 15. We are trying to, we call the project Dignity Defenders. What we're trying to do here is to teach them on gender norms, to bring about sensitivity, to also teach them. Some of them experience high levels of violence, so we're also trying to create a safe space for them to teach them about themselves, to also provide a space where they feel loved, and to provide a space where they can share and vent their stories that they go through on a daily. And we get to experience some of the most harmful issues that these learners are going through. So it's one of an important project that we are involved in. And we continuously look for opportunities to go into ensuring that learners in the LGBTI are supported as well as the teacher. But for us, the critical person is the teacher because ultimately they are the role models to the learners. So lastly, as an organization, as I close, is to say that we raise awareness on the ILO Convention C190 in workshops, in meetings, in webinars, and we've played a critical role in drafting a lot of different guidelines that are in the space. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, especially for sharing insights on the role of unions to hold the line and push it, and especially when it comes to a human rights-based education. And thanks so much for sharing the example on consultations and the challenges that the item on comprehensive sexual education has. Thank you for your reflections. Now we'll turn to another speaker. Their name is Aaron James Villapando, or AJ. Aaron is one of the program officers of the Philippines Anti-Discrimination Alliance of Youth Leaders, PANTAY. He contributes to initiatives such as lobbying for gender transformative policies and nurturing young leaders in sexual reproductive health rights advocacy. Additionally, his role as a council member of the National Anti-Poverty Commission of the Youth and Student Sector enables advocacy for marginalized voices, especially the queer community. Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you.
My first question for you is, can you tell us more about the projects your organization has implemented to make schools more inclusive?
Yeah, of course. I just want to share that Pantay, our organization, is a Tagalog term for equal. So of course, we're fighting for equality. And organization, Pantay, has received a lot of gender-based discrimination cases experienced by queer students. There was a case of a trans woman student who is a student council leader and was running for Latin honors. However, she was suspended because her gender expression violates her school's uniform and haircut policies. Her story is not an isolated case, and Pantay would like to contribute to efforts to ensure that there would be no other case like hers again. And of course, there is hope. A school that promotes inclusivity and diversity is possible through the project we've created, or Project GAZE, Gender Equality Index in Schools. Project GAZE is Pantay's testament of love for all gender-diverse students, ensuring they have access to education regardless of who they are. Project GAZE aims to address the lack of a standardized approach to schools' diversity and inclusion. It is supported by the Embassy of the Netherlands here in the Philippines. Through the project, we developed the Rainbow Report Card, a monitoring and evaluation tool to measure and improve the SOGIESC responsiveness and inclusivity of schools' programs, policies, and practices and attitudes, thereby protecting the right to education of gender-diverse students. The Rainbow Report Card has 25 indicators assessing school SOGIESC inclusivity in terms of policies. We're asking them if they have policies on bullying and discrimination. The second indicator is about learning environment. We're asking them if they are celebrating Pride Month, or do they have materials, workshops, or curriculums about gender sensitivity for students. Our third indicator is about staff development. We're asking the schools if they're providing gender sensitivity trainings for their staff, and do they mechanisms at place to make sure that their staff are practicing gender sensitivity. Our fourth indicator is about health, wellness, and dignity. We're asking the schools if they have inclusive sexual health and mental health programs and services to be provided for their students. And our sixth indicator for the Rainbow Report Card is about student leadership. I'm sorry, our fifth indicator is about personal safety and security. We're asking the schools if they have measures, or do they have reporting mechanisms in cases of discrimination and bullying, or do they have first responders, trained first responders to respond to those cases. And our sixth indicator for the Rainbow Report Card is about student leadership and participation. We're asking the schools if the LGBT students have spaces in their student councils, or can they organize through LGBT organizations? And of course, our last indicator for the Rainbow Report Card is about acceptance. We're asking if the LGBT students are experiencing a general feeling of acceptance. And the Rainbow Report Card that I'm talking about is a product of the collective effort of the commitment of students, queer students specifically, teaching and non-teaching staff, and school administrators, together with select national government agencies such as the Department of Education, National Youth Commission, and of course the Commission on Human Rights, and to make sure that Pantay is not just developing it, it's a co-creation of this tool that will make schools inclusive. And because of this project case, we created not only spaces for conversation. These conversations also surface the good in all of us. The people, in this case, the teachers and school administrators, come from a place of love and not hate. And when we converse with love and understanding, we can create safe spaces. Because of course, we have notions that the discriminatory schools are just coming from a place of hate against LGBT students. But through our conversations with them, we realize that they're coming from a place of love, of course. They're coming from a place of protection, and they just need guidance to become more inclusive. And for our second year, gladly we received a second year for our program. We're still working with some of the pilot schools from year one, helping them address the issues and gaps reflected from their assessment using the Rainbow Report Card. But assessment alone was not enough, of course. We also developed the Rainbow School Kit, because when we presented this project to the Department of Education, they asked us, what happens after the assessment? What comes next? So we also developed the Rainbow School Kit, a toolkit that provides concrete steps schools can take to meet the indicators outlined in the Rainbow Report Card. It contains suggested modules for training, write-ups, workshops, and capacity building activities that will help the schools achieve SOGIESC inclusion. Lastly, as a lobbying group, we recognize that conducting activities and programs are not sustainable, which is why we are also currently lobbying. As I've mentioned earlier, we're currently lobbying for the institutionalization, the Rainbow Report Card, and the Rainbow School Kit in the Department of Education and the Commission on Higher Education. Because we believe in our approach now is school-based. So we're just working with 10 to 15 schools. But if it's institutionalized on a national scale, it will be implemented, or it can be reflected in the policies of our national government. And lastly, of course, We're also one of the many organizations here in the Philippines working for the passage of our SOGIESC inclusivity or SOGIESC equality bill. So that's our project for the schools, but also we're working for the national law that will protect us against gender-based discrimination.
Thank you, Aaron, for sharing about your GAZE project and the Rainbow Report Card, as well as the indexes you have and the indicators. This really demonstrates the importance of promoting research to ensure inclusivity in schools, especially through toolkits and awareness raising and capacity building. My next question for you is, how can we make sure that children and youth are meaningfully involved in the discussions on the issues affecting them, such as bullying and the right to education?
Yeah. As a youth-led organization, of course, we believe that youth participation should not be tokenistic or just symbolic, right? So we believe that it should be genuine, it should be meaningful, and as I've mentioned earlier, as we create the Rainbow Report Card, we've involved students, queer students as well. When we developed the toolkit, students were not just respondents. They were co-creators, co-developers of this change. They identified the gaps, they shared their experiences, and they validated the indicators. And their lived experiences shaped the whole project. We're not coming from a place of like we're saving you or like we're a messiah saving you, we're doing this for you. We're not like that. Like we're coming from a place of working with them, co-creating the solution with them, because of course they're the experts of their uh, problems. And when I say there, of course we're also part of the community. uh, and to ensure meaningful, genuine youth participation, we should create structured platforms for youth voices, right? We're not just creating forums. We should be ensuring that LGBT students have spaces in the student council, they have spaces in the bodies, decision-making bodies that will affect their welfare. And we also have to make sure that they can organize through LGBT organizations for them to feel that they're not alone in this movement or they're not alone in this struggle. And as I've mentioned, we should also equip the youth with the tools. The Rainbow School Kit I've mentioned earlier, it has a module specifically intended for LGBT students, for them to be capacitated on the advocacy, for them to be capacitated on personal development. Because of course, we're not saying that we're empowering them or like we're not saying that they are not capacitated. It's just that we need to nurture their innate potential. In addition to that, Pantay also have another project called iCare. It's an integration of comprehensive approaches to rights-based education on sexual health and mental health. Because of course, the LGBT community or the LGBT students are vulnerable to sexual health issues, mental health issues. So through the project, we've capacitated queer students and selected school personnel for them to provide the awareness raising, the HIV screening, the psychological first aid to their peers. Because we also believe on the peer-to-peer approach. So with that project, we're providing technical assistance to the schools, given that one of the indicators in the Rainbow Report Card is about inclusive mental health and sexual health services and programs. And in addition to that, through the project case, selected schools that participated have conducted their capstone project where they received a financial assistance and they need to conduct an activity that will address an issue in their school related to gender-based discrimination. And one milestone for the project is that one of the participating schools, and it was led by an LGBT organization there. The project was led by an LGBT organization. They were able to lobby for a gender inclusive bathroom through the project because they recognize that we need that to address the issues in safety and security inside the bathroom. So through the project, they were able to lobby it, and just last year we were able to have a ribbon cutting for the gender inclusive bathroom. And this experiences, this case studies through our project are just manifestations that when LGBT students have spaces in their schools, they can create change. And it's not just a change, it's a movement because LGBT inclusion or gender inclusion in schools will not just benefit the LGBT students, it is for the welfare of everyone.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And it is true that to ensure meaningful and genuine participation, there has to be structures in place and that it cannot be done randomly. We have come to the end of the presentations by our panelists. Please feel free to drop any questions on the Q&A box and we'll be responding them directly on the Q&A. And I will pass it on to Curro Peña again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you to all the speakers. As a researcher, sometimes it's easy to get so focused on the laws and the documents that we review that it's always extremely useful and even refreshing to see how others that are working directly on these different contexts that we've seen are responding to the same issues that we're facing now. To remember, for me at least, it's useful to remember why we are defending that it's necessary to approve this law to support all of these examples of good practices. Over this webinar, it has been mentioned several times how bullying is, of course, an obstacle to the right to education. And speaking of which, let me introduce you to the last speaker today. Farida Shahid. Farida is a sociologist and researcher, as well as the executive director of Pakistan's leading gender justice organization, Shirkat Ga Women's Resource Center. She was the first independent expert on cultural rights and special rapporteur on that topic of the United Nations. And since 2022, she is the current special rapporteur on the right to education of the UN. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, Farida. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody. Thank you so much. First, I just want to congratulate ILGA on the work that you're undertaking. I think it's very essential and very important. And it's been a learning experience for me, and I thank all the presenters and all the wonderful work people are doing across the world to try and take this forward and to make education a safe space and generally society a safe space for those who do not have binary identities, who have a diversity. I think just to start with, I can't summarize everything. Let me just put some of the key things that come to me. I think affirming the right to be safe in education as a legal obligation is absolutely vital. And there was a question of the laws, but the laws are important because, as you said, it's not just laws identify the norms that should exist or should not exist. And also, once you have something in law, at least you have the possibility of it being justiciable. You can go and complain about it. Otherwise, it gets left out. And my 2025 report to the Human Rights Council last year, is focused on the right to education, the right to be safe in education. And that includes the right to be safe and to feel safe. And both are very important. They're slightly different. Meaning that the right of learners, whether they're learners, educators, non-teaching staff is also involved, all need to be protected from any kind of violations of their physical or sexual or psycho-emotional integrity and from practices that harm healthy relationships or free expression. And we've heard some of those issues come up by the panelists in all educational spaces, including digital spaces. And I think belonging, as Graham also mentioned in his opening remarks, is very important. And I've hired so many students now from your communities, but also other communities saying they don't feel safe. And what is important is being recognized as you walk into a hall, not the education that you're getting. So all persons must be able to enjoy and exercise their human rights in all aspects of education without any discrimination, fear, or reprisal in a non-intimidating environment. And so therefore, to me, the whole issue of SOGIESC bullying is a direct breach of human rights obligations, and it's not at all a peripheral issue, it's central. The multidimensional harms, I think, of bullying must be recognized, And again, I think Graham mentioned some of them. Bullying, which includes cyberbullying, of course, can take physical, verbal, sexual, relational forms. It can also take the form of social exclusions and discrimination. And all of these inflict psychological and social harm, which undermines a person's physical, psycho-emotional, and social safety. And I think those need to be recognized. Targeting learners because of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression directly violates the standards of human rights and the right to education. And harassment, increasingly, of course, is now unfolding in online spaces, and those are also connected to school life. But digital safety must be explicitly addressed. And I think we also need the safeguards and the general platforms that Enrique was talking about, where people can go and feel safe to receive information. I'm sure very few children in many places will go to their parents or the school or the teachers if they're experiencing questions or they want to explore. So we need to ensure that we need to promote them. They need to be known, which are safe and not safe for you to approach. And states, I think, are absolutely responsible for organizing trainings for teachers, for students, children, parents on the safe use of the internet and identification of online threats that exist. I also feel, as has been mentioned here, that teachers themselves and management of schools will also need to be oriented. I think they don't know how to deal with diversity in their classrooms. And they also, as was mentioned by Michelle, the teachers themselves who have different identities may not be able to be open about it. And that in itself is a problem. And teachers and staff and students all need also to be supported. And I think I was struck by the fact of the language that was being talked about, the fact that the AI generates language which is not really responsive to the needs of the people who are approaching it, and it may give you a different impression. So I think those are important. I think in terms of the international obligations of states, they have an immediate obligation to adopt laws, policies, and programs to prevent discrimination, harassment, and violence in all educational establishments, including clear and binding protocols, efficient reporting, and inspection mechanisms, and of course, effective remedies. I think the principle of progressive realization doesn't apply, and we have to keep repeating that because the obligation to ensure safe, non-discriminatory environments is a part of the right to education and is an immediate obligation. So ending institutionalized discrimination, I think, is central. And I'm really deeply concerned about the increasing removals of protections for specific groups, which are coming about in different countries, which includes girls and women, gender-based diversity, persons with disabilities. We've seen these being removed from the educational system. And I think those removals must be reversed and we need to pay attention. The legislation, I think, must explicitly address bullying, including cyberbullying, and ensure protection against sexual and gender-based violence. That silence in the law is often translated into silence in practice. So I think we need to make sure that we break that silence. Also, someone mentioned cultural norms. This is our culture. Culture is absolutely not any excuse for any violation of anyone's human rights. I think there is also a need to bridge the gap between law and people's lived experiences. And the report that I've done highlights that the complaint mechanisms are often inadequate. They're not safe. They're not confidential. And I think Graham also underlined this. And therefore, underreporting is a serious concern. The laws must therefore guarantee confidential and accessible reporting channels, which are supported by trained personnel. Some institutions have some reporting mechanisms, but they're really not exactly what you need. They need to be much safer. I think the states should gather and publish clear, regular, actionable data on all dimensions of safety and education. Therefore, I applaud all of you who are putting together that data, which is essential to make it visible. Because without disaggregated data, the SOGIESC-based bullying remains obscured. But I think slowly people are starting to talk about it. And the example from Philippines is a good example. Also, the work that ILGA is doing. I think teacher training is vital particularly on children's rights, and also non-violent forms of discipline, because there's a lot of disciplining that goes on also from the teacher's side, and that needs to be addressed. And prevention, you can't really rely on punitive measures, and that seems to be the go-to. I think you need to adopt a whole schools and a rights-based approach and ensure safety for everyone, which means the leadership, the teachers, the learners, parents, community members, and children must be recognized as participants and the agents of change. So to have them as part of the discussion, I think, is essential. Educational content, the disciplinary rules and governance must align with the aim of ensuring the right to education under international human rights law. And human rights education, I think itself, is also indispensable in dismantling prejudices that fuel the SOGIESC-based bullying. And I think we have heard twice about the need for comprehensive sexual education, which again is one of the areas which states are moving backwards on. And I think the backsliding is problematic. Just a word of caution in terms, it's vital that whatever safety measures are taken, they don't themselves undermine the rights of people. So in a sense, like Enrique was talking about, you need to balance the spaces that are available, the verification of the age, so it doesn't exclude children, but there's also the other side. So in the same sense, I think we may need to make sure that measures taken in the name of safety also comply with strict standards of legality, necessity, and proportionality. Over-securitization, which I seem to see increasingly, excessive surveillance or militarized approaches, which seem to be more and more common, and themselves create an intimidating environment and undermine the essence of education as a space for trust and free inquiry, and that is safe. Security measures, whatever they are, should be temporary, human rights compliant, and they must be accompanied by programs that address the root causes of violence, discrimination, and exclusion. So just to conclude, I think the laws against SOGI-based bullying are not symbolic at all. They're not symbolic gestures. They're concrete expressions of the obligations of states to ensure that every learner, regardless of identity, location, and any other factor, can enjoy education without discrimination, fear, or reprisal. And I think we really do need to build on and make visible the good practices, some of which you have identified in the ILGA database, and some of which we've heard about, so that other people can emulate them. People often say, yes, but what are the good practices? We don't know how this works. So I think that is important to advertise that. So advancing protective legislation backed by implementation, monitoring, data collection, training, and meaningful participation, I think is absolutely indispensable to transforming educational spaces into spaces where diversity is respected and all identities can be freely expressed. I think the right to education for me, of course, according to international human rights law, is it belongs to everybody. And so we need to protect those most at risk and strengthen the integrity of educational systems as a whole. So if we take those measures, I think education itself will become more meaningful for everyone. And finally, again, the criticality of including the voices of those who are affected in the discussions of what the laws should be and how they should. I mean, I was very happy about the South African example where you have to consult the unions. And I think there has to be more consultation, not just with the unions, with the students themselves, with younger people. And I think the voice of the youth really needs to come through as an essential determining factor of where we go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farida, for a really interesting presentation and a very nice way of wrapping up all of the conversation that we have today and summarizing it. Thank you so much. We have only 5 minutes. There are still some questions that haven't been resolved in the chat. Maybe I can read them aloud and see if any of the panelists would like to respond. Otherwise, we will close the webinar. And the first question is related to is from Jean-Marie Nishimwe from Burundi, mentioning how in countries like Burundi, where there is a legal framework criminalizing LGBTI people and prohibiting NGOs from working. How can stakeholders, the different stakeholders, work to advance legislation and other policies in the safeguard against SOGIESC-based bullying without exposing themselves to legal risk? Another question from an anonymous assistant is it's about Nigeria, but how I'm gonna read it. Nigeria saying LGBTQ laws, but I don't know how effective are them, and the practice is how yet to be. Where one can have members of the community in Nigeria. And the last question is for Peter Dan Meyer. I am missing the link with wider mainstream anti-bullying research. It shows that most bullying occurs as a social process in which popular students exclude and harass less powerful students. LGBTQ are just one of the victimized group. I'm gonna summarize. I'm sorry. Without having that more mainstream and comprehensive approach, our efforts will barely scratch the surface of the situation of LGBTQ students. What do presenters think on this? And if they agree, what are their ideas of this? So if any of the presenters will have a reply, you can read the full questions in the Q&A. I will invite you to say it.
Can I just take one minute? Graham, you should actually come in, but I'm just going to say in terms of where LGBTQI identities are criminalized, you can still approach the special procedures. As mandate holders, we are not obliged to go we can still take up this issue. And your identity is protected. It does not appear to the state who has given, but we cannot take action unless somebody comes to us with a complaint. We can't act on media statements, for instance, or something we've read. But there are increasingly a number of states where this is an issue. And I know that we have written to a number, especially I have taken the lead in terms of comprehensive sexual education being removed or issues of SOGI being removed from curricula. And I think Graham can also talk about that. And secondly, bullying, yes, it's a much wider issue. And that's why my report on safety is not limited to this community. There's also very high, all the bases of discrimination come out. So it's race, it's class, it's the language that you speak, it may be the religion that you speak. Persons with disabilities are particularly also targeted in terms of bullying in schools. Different learners who have different learning abilities are also bullied. And I think a big issue here is that bullying online continues from morning to night. So before, bullying has always existed in schools, but at least afterwards you could go away from school and you didn't have to worry about it. Now it follows you home and stays with you day and night.
Thank you so much, Farida. And any more answers? Okay, in that case, thank you so much to all of the speakers. Thank you, Graham, Enrique, Michelle, Farida, Aaron. Thank you, Andrea, for your excellent work as facilitator. Thank you to all the ILGA colleagues that have been working on this. Thanks, and sorry to the interpreters. I know I speak really fast. I really try to work on that. And thank you finally to all of the attendants. It's been, I think, a really interesting webinar, and I hope that it was also for you. I think we can close the webinar now. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.